So in our last video, we finished by talking about ethical issues in science, and we raised some issues which made us think about, or hopefully you thought about, there needs to be some sort of rules so that we can decide what's right or what's wrong and what we should and shouldn't do in science, to set boundaries. Otherwise, we end up in very murky territory. And I even talk about some movies that you could watch that talk about these things. If we have time this year, we can even watch them in class. Some of the classic ones, which I really like, a lot of them have to do with genetic engineering or cloning, or time travel, like a lot of the ethical things have to do with that as well, and some paradoxes. But some really cool cloning movies include Jurassic Park, Gattaca, Sixth Date, The Island, Blade Runner, Star Wars, Resident Evil, Aeon Flux, Battlestar Galactica, Ultraviolet, Godsend. All of these are great movies for if you have like these little weird scientific murky ethical areas and see what would happen, what ifs kind of things. And so, but the idea behind these movies, what makes them so cool, is the notion that, life could change dramatically if science took steps that went beyond perhaps what should happen. And so, because what happens to society is intrinsically connected to science, science should be intrinsically connected to society, and society should be a guiding principle in what science does. And so there's a two-way relationship here, and that's what we're going to talk about. What are the guiding lights for ethical conduct of science so that we do not go too far, too fast, and do not find ourselves as scientists doing things that we should not do? The four basic principles that any good scientist should follow when they're trying to decide, should I perform this research? Or am I going to, cause big problems by doing it? The first one is, of course, considering the consequences, both to society and to the natural world. What is it going to do to the world and to society at large if I actually do this? Am I going to destroy the world by trying to create a black hole here on Earth? Am I going to destroy the fabric of society by creating cloning? Am I going to change things substantially if I start doing the genetic engineering and, cookie cutter babies? The whole idea about racial cleansing, which brings things like Nazis to mind, but they're just one example. Throughout history, humankind has done so many genocide based on the idea of racial superiority and things like that, which make absolutely no biological sense. Diversity makes biological sense. So you see, where do we draw the line? Consequences. The first thing you have to think about is are the changes that are going to happen to the world and to science worth the effort that I'm going to be putting here? But it's actually very hard to predict all the consequences that are going to come. And that's why there's so many movies about the same topic, because it's really hard to decide what's going to happen sometimes. It's hard to have that much foresight, even when you kind of know a lot about it. So the second thing is economic considerations. It has to do with how much this is going to cost. Is it going to be feasible to actually do this? For example, what if I told you right now that there's a way that all of us can go to Mars within 6 months if need be? Just for the hell of it, if you have the money for it, we could go to Mars within 6 months. We can design this thing and launch the thing, and then in 6 months we'll be there. Is it possible? Well, I think it is possible. But it will cost so much money that perhaps it will bankrupt the world. So, is it going to happen? No, because the cost is too high. Likewise, don't you think it's possible to invest enough money in research to solve a lot of the problems that we have in healthcare and medicine? Absolutely. But there's not enough market for that. And so the cost is not worth the benefits, at least that's what people think. And so there's no money put into that. So a lot of the big things that stop science from happening sometimes is the economical cost of that. Sometimes it's not worth the effort if it's going to destroy so much more in trying to do it, economically. Likewise, is the legal cost too high? Is it against the law to do this? For example, you may argue that cloning humans might not even cause consequence for society if it's done over certain parameters. So we can put some sort of ethical parameters in line, and it might come the day that the technology is so good that it will actually be cheap enough that you can do it without too much economical expense. But it still may be illegal to do it. And so a scientist may, at that point, decide to stop down at its tracks because it can't do it. Let's say, for example, that because you could fly, you had money to fly, and it wouldn't damage anything for you to fly, but it was illegal to fly, for some reason. For example, there are certain areas of the earth where it's illegal to fly. And so no matter what happens, you can't do it. So sometimes laws make it impossible for you to do certain things. And finally, moral principles. Because sometimes you have to think about what's simply right. Is it ethically correct to make someone suffer? That's the greatest one, in my opinion. Because think about cancer research, for example. Let's propose an ethical argument here. I come up with you and I tell you that I have this cool, scientific, awesome knowledge that I came up with a lot of research, and now I have a way to cure every single kind of cancer, the second most common cause of death in hospitals in the United States of America, forever. No one else would die of cancer. All the people who are suffering today, all the people who you have lost or know someone who has lost, everybody who has suffered from that will not suffer anymore. Cancer is gone forever. But as I try to implement this, and this is implemented throughout society, kind of like the I Am Legend kind of thing. There's a consequence. There's like another great movie about ethical biological research. But in this case, 2 billion people would have to die for that to happen. But you can argue yourself, there's 7 billion people on Earth. 5 billion will be left, and then out of those 5 billion, from now on, there will be no more cancer. And so you stop to think about it and say, okay, is it worth killing those 2 billion people for this? Should we even consider this? What if one of those 2 billion people is you, or your friend, or your mother? Are you still willing to do it? And even if it's not that, is it right to kill people to solve a problem? Ethical concerns should definitely be one of the guiding lights. And while we're on the subject, there are some things which should not be guiding lights. You should not follow what authority says it's right. Because history is full of examples of people in position of power saying that this is what you should do, and it ends up being bad. All the genocides in the history of the earth are perfect examples of that. Nazi says, Jewish people are going to be the source of our problems. We can solve them by segregating them, and then that happens. Absolutely horrible way of thinking. And that's what led to so many problems. Things we are now ashamed of it as a human race that happened. And they keep happening in so many places, unfortunately, around the world. You think the Holocaust was bad? Worse things have happened and continue happening today. What about majority? Most people think this is right, so it's got to be right, right? Just because most people say it's true doesn't make it right. Most people used to think that slavery was okay. That didn't make it right. So the precedent of majority is not good for ethical concerns. Also, religion. Now, it is true that our sense of right and wrong is often tied to religion. 90% of the people on earth believe in some sort of higher power. And 90% of them draw their sense of morality from religion. So one of the guiding lights, which is the right or versus wrong, it's immediately going to be connected to that. But what I mean by that is that I'm not so exactly comfortable with somebody sitting on top of a pulpit in a position of authority, or maybe even a majority, and quoting some religious text to say what should and should not be done in science. The problem I have with that is because religion sometimes abuses its power. Lots of examples in history, including things like the Inquisition, the Crusades, and all the holy wars around the world, have shown many examples of what religion can do when it's usurped. And so it's very dangerous to just use religion blindly as a guiding light. Not a good idea. And also, precedent. Let's do it because it's been done before. It's like the whole thing, women never voted. So why should they vote? They never voted. So it's not right for them to vote because they never did. So just because it's the way it's always been done, it doesn't make it right. So those ideas are problematic. So careful with authority, majority, religion, and precedent, because they'll cause problems. So overall, then, what you should really be looking at is at the practicality of it. Do the costs outweigh, the benefits, or vice versa? Are you going to get more out of this than its cost? And at the same time, you're going to look at the consequences for society and for nature, at the economical cost, the legal cost, the moral value of this action, and you should look at all of them together, because if one fails, it's going to be very hard for all of them to fail. So for example, something might not be illegal. It might be financially be doable. It may not be cost much to nature itself, but it may be wrong to do it. And so you won't do it. You know? That's the example that I was talking about. Think about what I just said about the cancer, for example. 2 billion people dying sounds like a horrible thing that would happen to the human race, but in fact, the human race is already overpopulated. I won't defend that kind of mentality at all. But theoretically, from a biological standpoint, it would not hurt nature for 2 billion of us to die. In fact, it might even help the world a bit. But that's not something that we want because it's morally wrong. And so, even if it was affordable, even if it was possible, you know, even if it was legal, it may still be wrong. And so you won't do it. You have to look at all of it together. And remember that science is often used as a force that changes society. And therefore, we have to consider society when we're doing science. Okay? Alright. On the next video, we're going to talk about how to tell science from things that kind of sound like science. I'll see you guys then.